Welcome to the Criterion Correction. My name is Dr. Beta Zed.
And I'm Ed.
In this podcast, we'll be delving deep into the Criterion Collection of films, trying to figure out exactly what it says about cinema as a whole and what makes a movie worthy of being added to the collection. Join us as we decide, should we collect them all? And tonight we are looking at a dystopia future sci-fi film, totally up my alley. Really, how could you get more in line with my interests? So it is the wonderful and not strange at all Jean-Luc Godard's Alphaville.
And Dr. Z, I know that the reason that you're a doctor is that you've done a lot of work for tech companies with your different algorithms and work with artificial intelligence. And I know you've been working on a replacement for Siri, but, I'm not sure your replacement really works.
It's called Schmeary.
Schmeary, okay.
And I've worked for Schmoogle and Schmapple.
You know there's a Schnapple that is not for tech, but okay, maybe they have a tech division, that's fine. But
No, not Snapple, Schnapple.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. So, I mean, for our listeners, can you describe your AI pitch a little bit? I'm not sure I'm completely getting it.
Well, obviously, when you invent a hyper-intelligent machine entity, you need to give it the appearance of having a body. And what screams having a body more than producing excess gas? Which is why we decided to have the Belchotron 60. Well, later we renamed it. It didn't quite work as well as that. Alpha 60 is a little bit snappier.
Yeah, I would say that it was a good branding move to go with Alpha 60, but I'm not sold on the voice, because when people want to go to AIs, they want security. They don't want their AI to sound like this every time it talks.
We did extensive market research, and it turns out that people really did want a very slow, so it was easy to comprehend, and unique sounding entity that would always remind you that it's got a bad case of indigestion. So it would give more of the illusion that you're working with something that's actually alive.
Okay. Are we going to expect the Weepatron 60 soon? Because what's more human than crying? Turn left at the 7-Eleven.
Hey, that's a trade secret.
I'm not sure if you hit gold, but on the other hand, I'm not sure Poetic Plot is going to either. In from the Outlands comes Lemmy Caution, with tripartite goals that he has to achieve. Find Henri Dixon, Prof. Von Braun missing, and defeat Alpha 60 before he can leave. Wasting away again inside of Alphaville, where there's a fresh suppression of thought. Some people claim that there's emotion to blame, but I think, it's the AI's fault. He meets with Natacha, but the feds are like, gotcha. He's quizzed up by Alpha a couple of times. With the littlest shove, he and her find love and escape custody by dozens of crimes. Escaping away to outside of Alphaville, with Alpha 60 I think now destroyed. The lovers escape from every threaten and scrape, and Natacha finds that love is her joy.
Can I take a verse? Some people claim that there's an Orwell to blame, but I don't. It's all Aldous Huxley's fault.
I will say I kind of liked your verse almost as much. Let me start off with this thought. One of my friends at one point, talking about an American film, called the film very French. And basically she was using French as a synonym for pretentious. And whatever else you think you might be able to say about Alphaville, I think one would have to say it is very French.
I guess. I wouldn't say it's very French in the sense of pretentiousness, though.
I suppose that's slightly unfair. I've certainly seen much more pretentious films than this. And since you've been disappointing me with making references to other films we've seen, I'll beat you to this one. Were you at all ever going to bring up Black Moon in this episode?
I wasn't. I thought this is kind of... I don't know. This is way more narratively sensical than Black Moon.
Oh, very true. Yeah.
I'm sensing there's a connection, though, so please do enlighten me.
Actually, there's no connection. I was just thinking that they're both French, and I thought you might respond negatively to some of the longer passages of philosophy and poetry and such.
I actually did not mind that in the least.
How our Dr. Z has grown.
I suppose. I mean, I don't know. You just assume that I see a weird French movie and I'm automatically going to make a Black Moon reference? Come on, I'm more likely to make a The Room reference any day of the week than that.
Yeah, fair enough. So before we get too far into this, I feel I need to mention, as you did, the director Jean-Luc Godard. We didn't mention him in our episode of Jules and Jim, but he was a contemporary of Francois Truffaut. They were both pivotal members of the French New Wave. But while Truffaut was a little bit more conventionally narrative, Godard is always weird. I've only seen, this is only the third film of his I've seen. The other ones were 2 or 3 things I know about her, which was kind of a half narrative, half documentary type thing that I wasn't prepared for. And the other was Contempt, which adequately describes my feelings towards the film. So this, believe it or not, this might actually be one of Godard's more normal films.
I can see that. I've got to say, I was expecting a little weirder, and honestly, I think that the reason why it doesn't quite live up to me in terms of weirdness, and not even saying that in a bad way, is that I can imagine this being very strange at the time it was released. But now there's enough mildly resonating things that it kind of makes sense.
Well, honestly, and I was getting thoughts of Blade Runner while I was watching this. Not in terms of really style or narrative, but both being kind of sci-fi dystopias, again, not an unknown thing, but with
a little bit of a noir element as well.
Exactly, with the noir element, with your main character being a kind of PI type thing, which is definitely not the most normal thing for a sci-fi setting. Again, not completely unheard of, but I think there's some connections there that are interesting. Which, I don't know if you came across this in your research, Lemmy Caution was a real fictional character outside of Alphaville.
Oh, no, I had no clue.
He was a real detective character created by, I believe, a British novelist who was actually portrayed in 7 previous films by the same actor who portrays him here.
Oh, that's cool then. So this was almost like a James Bond style sequel.
Kind of, but James Bond, basically, for me, it seems like the same actor playing Lemmy Caution in legitimate noir films. And this would be like if Sean Connery moved from playing James Bond and then starring in Zardoz, and he was still playing James Bond.
Okay, no, I understand what you mean then. Yeah, would be out of left field in comparison to the previous Lemmy Caution movies.
And we've talked a lot about different films deconstructing or not deconstructing the genres they're in. I think this is probably one of the strongest cases for deconstruction that we've ever had on this show.
Really? Do go on.
Well, I mean, just that fact alone about this being a character that existed outside of this film in its quote-unquote intended context and being used for this context. And even if you leave that aside, the French New Wave in general was well known for liking American film noir. And even if I didn't know, and I didn't know before watching the film, that Lemmy Caution was a pre-existing character, he definitely read like an archetypal noir character, but on steroids.
Yeah, I mean, just because he immediately shows up and starts shooting people in his hotel room.
And hitting women.
Yeah, look at that too.
So right away, it's just like, well, whatever else this film is, it's not going to be boring.
Hey, he's still more likable than, what was that movie we watched recently?
Something Wild. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I know your intolerance for venal sins, and I was wondering how long would it be before you hated Lemmy Caution?
I didn't end up hating him. In any case, yes, genre deconstruction takes it to the nines. I think it didn't quite strike me as heavily here because automatically none of the characters seemed like characters. That from the outset, and part of this is just, I think, instilled from the fact that I knew this was going to be insane. The interaction between these individuals is so stilted and strange, partly because of the constructions of this Alphaville where there's no emotion and everyone is, thanks for asking. What was the rest of it?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
It just didn't read as they were actual character interactions. And then when violence started happening and a level 3 seductress was taking a bath and some guy comes in and there's a fist fight, I wasn't really questioning it or treating it in the same way as I would a character that, or as a movie that had characters that were behaving in a logical way, because the movie itself was sort of throwing this at you like, hey, this place is weird, doesn't follow rules.
And this is going to sound like I dislike the movie more than I did, but it's kind of a long-form essay masquerading as a movie.
I didn't read it as a long-form essay, and I know what you mean. There is a lot of philosophy sort of stuck into this movie, and it is a little heavy-handed in terms of emotion good versus emotion bad. But the way in which it portrayed this crazy technological dictatorship didn't strike me as too far off in some regards, at least in terms of like, I think it almost has more cultural cachet today than it would have back then, and more resonance just in terms of the way in which we interact with technology on a regular basis.
And I actually agree with you about that. For example, at least one and perhaps several points, I know characters make, not under this specific term, but basically express reservations about big data, which is certainly something that we're talking about today.
And using data to mine the perfect solutions and answers for things like economics. And I think of the stock market and how algorithms are responsible for micro trades that are happening in fractions of seconds in response to real world events. It isn't all that far off from good old Alpha 60.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially because we live in even more of a technological society than they did in 1965. I mean, yes, any wave of technology seems overwhelming when you're in the midst of it, but it certainly reigns much more supreme. In 1965, yes, IBM was important, and they were I actually think at that point they weren't one of the biggest companies in the world. If you look at the top 5 companies in the world, I think 4, if not all 5, or maybe this is just America, I forget, but 4, if not all 5, were tech companies.
So yeah, in a lot of ways, I think this movie was very prescient in its predictions, and that I can appreciate. And so I imagine that when it came out, there's just so much bizarre imagery in this. In particular, the execution swimming Olympics. I don't even know what to make of it. It's, for those of you who haven't seen the film, essentially they hold executions by putting a person on the end of a diving board, shooting him, but not enough to kill him, and then a team of swimmers, I assume, I couldn't tell if they had knives or they were just drowning, but they go on the hunt and they finish off the person before doing synchronized swimming routines on their way back to the side of the pool.
See, I read that slightly differently. I thought that I know this won't make any sense, but it makes a sense as much as what you just said, was that they did shoot them enough to kill them when they went into the pool, and the swimmers were just there to retrieve the body, which for a technocracy like this, that is a very inefficient use of resources in shooting somebody and then having somebody else retrieve the body further down the pool than if they had just dropped on the floor.
I guess I just took it as in the first instance where we saw it, I thought the guy was swimming away slowly while injured. And then the last one was definitely still yelling stuff before the swim team got to him, which, man, that's a crazy new sport.
I'm waiting for it to be in the Olympics in 2020. And yes, I agree with you. I think what carried me most in the film was the visual style, which I did captivate me. I thought it was very interesting. And specifically that the element where this is obviously supposed to be at least the pseudo-futuristic society, but it looks just like 1965 France. They don't dress it up. They don't do sets. They don't do matte paintings. It's just 1965 France. And I think that's an interesting decision. And I'd be interested to hear what you thought of it.
I think it, for me, added this strange cognitive dissonance where they're talking about all of these futuristic things. And in some places, the imagery, the way it was captured, did look somewhat impressive, despite the fact that they didn't do any additional work making it look futuristic. I think that it added this weird element of a lived-in universe more so than if you had something like, is it Jupiter Ascending?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where you would have all of this polish but none of the soul, and it had this gritty feel. And I'm not saying it was the best choice in all cases, but at the same time, it worked with the vibe of the movie, and especially at night. I think that the at night scenes were far more convincing just because it left more to the imagination. But it did its job of making this seem like, this is a completely different environment that we're in at the moment.
I completely agree, though I do not agree with your implied slam against Jupiter Ascending, because that movie is amazing.
Man, that's where I feel like that's an instance where you're going lowbrow for once.
I just love how crazy and stupid that movie is.
All right. So I think that ultimately one of my favorite images is just the elevator scenes here. There's so many of them, so many like little, especially in the beginning of the film, and just the way in which the camera is seemingly, possibly even in like the elevator booth next to the one the characters are in and follows them. There's just something about those shots, the way that they were framed, the way that they played out. I don't know. I just really liked it.
No, I agree, and you are indeed correct. There was another clear glass elevator that was next to that elevator, which they shot it from, and they apparently had some trouble with it, just synchronizing it at exactly the same time. But they managed to do it. And yes, I agree that the technical prowess there was very notable.
So this clearly is attempting to break a lot of conventions, that it is a very strangely assembled movie that forces you to almost put the pieces together yourself. It's unique in its narrative conventions, and aside from the Belchatron 2000...
We need to talk about the Belchatron 2000 a little bit more. I know we talked about it in our opening, but...
It took me a while to figure out that was even the artificial intelligence.
Oh yeah, me too. I eventually got there and understood that, but for a second I was like, why is somebody belching at me?
Well, it just sounded like a very, I don't know, like 140-year-old guy.
140-year-old guy who'd smoked a pack of Marlboros a day for all 140 years of his existence. Yes, even in the crib, he was smoking Marlboros.
And so it took me a while to figure out that was the AI. Afterwards, this movie just worked for me in a weird way. And I wasn't quite sure if it would because, again, I know it's new wave and that to me often screams pretentiousness, but here it didn't give me that vibe.
Do you think it was because these are issues that A, resonate more, and I get you've already alluded to that, but B, kind of play a little bit more to your natural interests?
Oh, definitely both A and B, that I think they resonate quite a bit here. And despite the fact that this was a very low-tech futuristic society, it just, it sort of struck me having enough amount of intrigue where at first I was like, is this really like a different planet even the way they're talking about this? I had to, like pay attention, and I'm just like, okay, is this just a different country, a different planet? Is there something weirder even going on here? So it definitely played out that way, and it even gave me sort of an old school Star Trek vibe. Just even the theme with Natacha. I imagine, isn't there like a original series episode where they come across a bunch of androids? What is love?
Oh, Mud's Women. Not, or is it the sequel episode? One of the ones with Harry and Mudd.
And to me, that was just like part of it where it was just like, oh, this is like the same exact setup. What is love?
It's Mud, for the record. It would have bothered me if I had gotten that wrong forever.
Oh, Mud, yes. That would totally destroy your cred.
Yep, not the fact that I like Jupiter Ascending. Did you catch some of the different nods to kind of American or Anglo-American pop culture in the film?
Probably not.
So at one point, the characters mention Dick Tracy as being a real person. There's the fact that Lemmy Caution is Agent 003, a not at all subtle nod to 007, James Bond again. And then the fact that Professor Von Braun, who is himself a reference to Werner Von Braun, his former name was Nosferatu.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. I wanted to see Nosferatu in the movie.
Vlad Dracul, nuclear scientist.
I've got to say, that's still the creepiest movie I've never seen and never want to see because I don't think I'd ever sleep again.
What, Nosferatu?
I have nightmares of that being a mini feature of an episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark?
I'll remember this for October.
Oh, for me, one thing that worked well also was the music, even with some of the repetitious themes. I don't know what it was, but a lot of times the music of a movie will have a pretty strong impact on me. And in particular, black and white movies, I don't know, this is an unfair characterization, but a lot of them have soundtracks that just seem completely divorced from anything that's happening in the actual movie. And here, I thought it played really well.
I agree. I did like the music, and the repetition of it started to irritate me, but then it moved from irritation to be a little bit of amusement. That I'm pretty sure they knew what they were doing with repeating the music stings, and that they were being at least slightly funny about it. And once I caught on to that, just like that's cool.
It gave me, I don't know why, it gave me an Airplane vibe. Like, I can't explain it. Just, I feel like the beginning, the music in Airplane is so over the top, and it just gave me that vibe.
I can see that. And some of the sources I was reading did indicate that this was supposed to be a bit of a spoof of sci-fi films. Obviously, a spoof with a bit of a brain, but kind of doing some of these things tongue-in-cheek, and I think you definitely see that with the music.
Man, it succeeded. I have to say, it won me over despite my best attempts to not like it. I guess that's not accurate to say, but...
Well, if that's the case, you've given us your opinion a little bit early, but we'll still move to our final segment, Collect Them All or Collect Not at All. Do we think this is more of an Alphaville, or do we think this is more of an Omegaberg?
Man, Omegaberg, that's the sequel. We'll make it. Belchatron 5000, here we come.
I will be cast as that!
You can have at it. So, for me, this is a clear and firm yes, which I honestly did not expect. I mean, I selected this movie for us to watch. I knew a little bit about it, knew it was going to be weird, knew it would be sci-fi, but still had some hesitation in terms of what this would end up being. At the beginning, I was not sure what to make of this at all. But in the end, the cinematography and the relevance, the strange relevance of this technocratic society just totally won me over. And I have to say that I really appreciate the movie. And I think that it does a lot, both in terms of its narrative conventions and its imagery.
Very well spoken. And for me, I'm kind of grading this on a minor curve, given my history with the director. It's become clear to me that Godard is not really concerned with narrative, and as I was mentioning earlier, Alphaville is probably his most focused of the films I've seen so far. And given that, the interesting style and the heady ideas that it's working with, I have to say I at least found Alphaville rewarding enough to consider watching it again, if only to make sure that I understood it. So, yeah, I'm a collect.
So if our audience would love to praise us or condemn us to a dystopia future with a belching AI robot, where can they provide their feedback?
They can subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or their podcatcher of choice. You can rate and review us there. We'd love to hear your feedback, particularly on my Belchatron voice. You can like us on Facebook. We're the Criterion Correction. And find us on Instagram. We're Criterion Correction. We have a great community of fans there, and we've accepted a lot of recommendations from there in the past, and we hope to do so in the future.
Oh, we also have some additional recommendations. So we will get to those very shortly. And where will we be going cinematically in the coming week?
Well, Dr. Z, last year, I helped you discover a new favorite actor, and I think it's time for that actor to come back again. In fact, I think it's written on the wind that we experience the return of the man, the myth, the legend, Rock Hudson.
Rock Hudson, yes! Oh man, is it Avalanche? Is it Avalanche? Tell me it's Avalanche.
No, it's written on the wind.
Oh, I want Avalanche.
It's not the Criterion Collection, so you're not getting Avalanche.
It should be. All right. Well, I guess that'll do it. I've been Dr. Beta Zed.
And I've been Ed.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. The theme song for the Criterion Correction was composed by Chris Wrigley of Bunhouse Jingles. You can listen to more of his work at podcastthemesongs.com.